Karen, what are we making here? We've got a brown bread recipe situation?
Yes, so we wanted to show you guys how to elevate a very simple brown bread recipe into something that's super digestible, into something that unlocks the phosphorus inherent in the ingredients we're using, into something that's usable for your metabolism. And we want you to be able to absorb the iron and the magnesium and the calcium in the flours that you guys are using at home. So,
what's wrong with the regular brown bread? If I go to a supermarket and I see brown bread, I'm like, that looks healthy. It's got a farm in the front. What's wrong with that bread versus, what's the difference between that bread and this bread?
And this bread. So, I mean, that bread probably hasn't gone through a process to make it digestible. And it's as simple as that. In all grains, nuts and seeds, you've got these anti-nutrients, these enzyme inhibitors that are known as oxalates or phytic acid or tannins. But particularly in flour, you've got a lot of phytic acid. And phytic acid is locked up with these nutrients that are so potent for your health. And if that ingredient doesn't go through a process to make it digestible, then you're not going to uptake the nutrients that otherwise would be bioavailable in those flours and ingredients.
Okay, so these nutrients are sort of like locked in this safe, and without actually unlocking that safe and allowing you to get the treasure inside, you're basically just not absorbing anything.
Right, you're just absorbing calories, really. And you're not taking in phosphorus, which first and foremost is really necessary for healthy metabolism. And so on our school days, we meet loads of people that come with like slow digestion. You know, they describe their digestion as being sluggish. And when I go through what they're eating and the breads that they're eating actually an awful lot of phytic acid. And so they've got the conduit through which they could have a good metabolism, but they're just not putting that through a soak.
Okay.
So as soon as they start making bread in this way, they're like, oh my God, Karen, my health has totally changed. Like I'm going to the loo every day, my energy levels are better, I don't have anxiety. It's just chemical reactions in the body are hugely dependent on enzymes. So we need enzymes to stimulate necessary chemical reactions in the body that are warranted for health, for every organ's health. So if we ingest something that has an enzyme inhibitor in it, of course we are not going to feel well.
Okay.
It is just as basic and as simple as that. And so what we're doing here is we're emulating what happens in nature. So in nature, at springtime, with the rainfall, you get this acidic soil. And that acidity says to the ingredient, hey guys, let's germinate now. And so the enzyme inhibitor, aka the anti-nutrient, aka the phytic acid, that is transformed in this acidic solution into phosphorus, and it unbinds from things like magnesium, iron, and calcium, and it allows all the proteins to become digestible as well. So this thing is germinating into like a big flower that then can thrive. And so essentially what we're doing here in your home kitchen is where we're bringing spring rain to your kitchen, we're bringing like an acidic soil to your kitchen, and we're just emulating what happens in nature so that you ingest something that is going to nourish you. If you ingest any of these ingredients without soaking, very simply, or fermentation, you will not be nourished. Simple as that.
Okay, so it's not that bread is the issue.
Yes,
there's a lot of bread bashing out there.
Yeah.
It's the fact that bread hasn't been through a proper process to make the nutrients inside of that good quality flour,
right,
whole flour, digestible for the person.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
Exactly it.
So this whole process that we're going to go through today is what I see as a very simple bread recipe, something that I could do because I'm not a baker.
100%.
But just some tweaks to the process to make you absorb the nutrient-dense ingredients that we have locked in inside.
Right. Okay. So on a very basic level at home, you're going to be adding maybe flour with buttermilk and an egg. And then to give that bread rise, you're going to either use a sourdough starter or bicarb. Sourdough starter, sounds convoluted and complicated, but it really isn't. And we'll talk about that later. But on a very basic level, you'll be able to go to any food website and get a brown bread recipe that will call for buttermilk and bicarb. What we want to do is use the buttermilk as your culture. So you're going to do the exact same thing you always do. You're going to prepare your loaf of bread as normal, but instead of baking it straight away, because you can do so with bicarb and give it rise, you're just going to let that dough sit overnight, and then you're going to bake it the next day. What happens is the lactic acid in the buttermilk is going to ferment. So number one, it's going to soak in the buttermilk, but then number two, there's going to be an extra phase which is known as fermentation, and that lactic fermentation is going to increase the bioavailability of the proteins, and in some cases the nutrients like your B vitamins, your magnesium and your iron. To what effect, we don't know, but we can say categorically that it will increase the bioavailability of certain nutrients. And so in a time when more and more people are going, vegetarian, a recipe like this is really helpful in ensuring that you have proteins that are like absorbable in your body, and things like iron, calcium and magnesium. So what we're going to do is, I don't want you guys, I could talk to you at length about heritage farming and organic farming and all that kind of stuff, but I'm going to lose your attention, and I don't want to do that. I want you to be able to walk into any supermarket across the world and buy these flours and make them more digestible. So step one is, you don't need to go anywhere. Maybe you need to get some buttermilk. Maybe you need to convert milk into buttermilk, something like that. But step one really is just take what's in your cupboard and make it more digestible. So that's what we're doing today. So in most places around the world, it's really easy to get wholemeal flour. So we're just going to use 200 grams of wholemeal flour. Now, it can come from anywhere. It can be a heritage variety. It can just be as basic as something from any supermarket across the country. But we're going to use 200 grams of that. And then to that wholemeal flour, we're using 200 grams of spelt. So spelt, again, it's wildly available now, which is amazing. However, you could just use wholemeal flour. If spelt is too far reach, if your local supermarket doesn't hold it, don't use it. It's fine. Don't stress. What we're teaching you here today is how to unlock the nourishment in this flour.
What's the difference, forgive my ignorance here, what's the difference between a spelt flour and a wholemeal flour?
So the spelt will be wholemeal spelt. So spelt is the grass variety, and then the wholemeal wheat, they're just two different grasses.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So essentially, what we have here is we've just got double the diversity we would if we were just to use one flour, Rupy.
And if we're looking for the best quality flour, let's say we have all the time in the world and we want to go to different supermarkets and all the rest, or grocers, what criteria are we looking for the best spelt and the best wholemeal flour?
Great question. So provenance is key. So the terroir in which it's grown is really, really, really key. So on packaging, if it says grown in Britain, if it says stone ground, that is something that you know is going to be high in enzyme activity, because the stone grinding process doesn't reach the high temperatures of roller mills. And so the enzyme activity is protected.
Okay.
The other thing you might hear about, if you're real geeky, is you'll hear about extraction levels. So there is various kind of percentages in terms of extraction. So some people, when they grind down a brown flour, they'll be at 98% extraction. Others might be down to 92% extraction. The extraction number indicates how much bran is in the flour. So if you're at a 100% extraction, the whole wheat kernel is in that flour. Okay. But if you're like at 92% extraction, you've maybe left out a bit of the bran.
Okay.
And so that's why in these very basic recipes, you can then add bran into the recipe to make sure that you're getting that potent fibre in that you need for your colon health.
Gotcha. So that's stone ground, the provenance,
yes,
extraction. Some of these, I know in other ingredients, companies can get away with saying certain words because they're not protected terms.
Right.
Is that something that's similar to flours?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of growth in that area, Rupy. It's a really good thing to highlight. Like, there is talk in the bread industry around like, what does heritage mean? Like, what is classified as a heritage seed? And so that isn't classified yet.
Okay.
It's not protected. There is no protection for grains in Britain right now. You know, you can grow whatever grain you can off a certain list of ingredients pretty much anywhere you want. But I'm sure, and I hope that through, you know, people's want for more food security in this country, that, we start protecting.
Okay, and if I'm really geeking out, extraction level, that's really, that's completely new to me. We're going to add more fibre through the brand,
exactly,
is that
because kind of to your point, like on packaging, if you go somewhere like E5 Bakehouse and to their milling department, on all of the outside of all of their bags, they will give you the percentage of extraction because they know what that means and they know it's really important. But just to your regular consumer of bread, they don't know that 100% extraction means all the bran is in the flour. So there's a huge disparity between wholemeal flour. Like, you could be buying wholemeal flour that's got 67% extraction all the way up to 98% extraction. They don't need to put that on the label. It can still be called a wholemeal flour because there is some amount of bran in it. And so when you don't really know what's in the bag of flour that you're buying, it is always much safer and more conducive for bowel health to add wheat bran into the recipe as well.
Yeah, there's a nice parallel with extra virgin olive oil. So for it to be labelled as hot healthy, it needs 250 milligrams of polyphenols per kilogram of product.
Awesome.
And those who are in the business know that that means that's an important thing to put on the label.
Right.
So if you look out for that, sometimes it's 300, sometimes it's 400, depending on the actual process, the brand. So again, it's probably one of those other things that people who are in the know will look out for.
Right.
And the same thing now, people will know, okay, I look for extraction.
Yeah, I need more fibre in. So because we want to give you good bowel movement from the bread that you're eating, detoxification is really incredibly important for the body, and that happens through having high fibre diet. But we also are aware that some people need a bit more soluble fibre in their diet. Therefore, we're using oats, which is an ingredient that's much higher in soluble fibre than insoluble fibre. So we're using oats in this recipe today. Most brown bread recipes will call for oats anyway, and oats are incredible at keeping you fuller for longer. So we've got 50 grams of wheat bran in here, and we've got 25 grams of oats. You can change that ratio dependent on what you need. If you're someone who suffers with really bad constipation, you can leave the oats out and just use the wheat bran. But if you're someone who has maybe too frequent a bowel movement, then you could just use all oats instead of wheat bran. So you can swap it up dependent on what your condition is.
And we were looking at the package of this wheat bran, and this is bloody high in fibre.
Really high. So we've got 45 grams of fibre per 100 grams here, and the protein content was up at around 20 something. So that's a nice ratio of fibre to protein. So you've got your prebiotic fibre, which is going to stimulate enzyme activity in the gut, and then you've got these proteins, which we're going to make more digestible, then available to you to create branched chain fatty acids, to keep inflammation down and do other really cool things around the body. But really, this is a very simple recipe which has been created in ratios that work for your gut health no matter where you are in your kind of well-being journey.
And you were telling me earlier about this ratio being very important. It's something that we've lost through manufacturing processes. Remind me again what the ratio of fibre and protein should be and why we should be cognizant of that. So
we need to eat 66 parts dietary fibre to every 33 parts dietary protein. So our gut bacteria's food of choice is this exact ratio. And when you start eating in this ratio, you really reap the benefits very, very quickly because you're essentially just feeding your gut bacteria exactly what they want. And this is how I create recipes, and this is why our recipes are so effective so quickly for people versus maybe, you engage eating sourdough, but engaging eating sourdough, that might have a long-term effect on bowel health, but it won't be as quick as when you actually do the ratio that works. So 66 parts to 33 parts. Before the Industrial Revolution and before World War II, all of the pulses and grasses that we were growing across Britain had this kind of ratio inherent in their chemistry. because we were farming for quality over yield. But kind of from the 1940s onwards, we started farming for yield at all cost, because obviously during the war, people were starving and we needed access to food quickly, and each acre needed to be yielding a huge amount per season. And so we kind of lost this chemistry that is actually conducive to lifelong health. So when it comes to all ingredients, pulses, nuts, grains, there's a huge disparity between an heirloom variety and a modern cultivar of that food. So a modern cultivar will inevitably have like a huge inside to little surface area, whereas heirloom will have much more surface area to the middle. So on the outside is where you find all these prebiotic fibers, these proteins, these irons, magnesium, calciums, and then in the inside you've got like a lot of the energy and a lot of the soluble fiber. And so just as a very basic rule of thumb, trying to buy local heirloom varieties of things will mean that you are more than likely eating in this ratio, which is 66 parts fiber to 33 parts protein.
Fab. Okay, so we've got our oats, our wheat bran, we've got spelt, wholemeal flour. What else goes in this?
We're just going to stir the dry blend.
Yeah. Should I just use a spoon?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. I'll use this.
So you're just stirring this really, really quickly, guys. Like this takes you 4 minutes to make it home. And then once all of your dry ingredients are fully blended, you're just going to crack an egg into this mixture, and you're going to mix the egg through the flour blend really, really quickly, and then we're going to add our buttermilk.
So I'm just literally going to crack it in.
Literally just crack it in and then stir it through, and that's just going to help bind things together. And then the buttermilk.
Okay, fine. So stir this through.
Right. And it doesn't need to go all the way through because it's
Yeah, it's just one egg.
Yeah, it's just one egg.
I was going to say, if it has to go through everything, I'm going to be here for a little while. Okay, so
and so now you can add your buttermilk.
Just now the buttermilk.
Yeah,
okay,
just add the buttermilk. So like this is super, super basic. You don't want to make this bread in a bread mixer. When you're using wholemeal flour, the gluten is less.
Okay.
And so if you were to overwork this dough, it would kind of become a sloppy mess and you wouldn't have bread with structure.
Okay.
So you can just all of it in one go. Like this is just super basic, guys. And literally you're just going to stir all this together and you're going to leave it sit overnight, and then tomorrow you're going to bake it.
So how much butter was that? 500 mils?
This is the little pivot for you guys at home. So let's say you're using a recipe currently that calls for 500 mils of milk. When you convert that recipe into a soaked recipe, you want to increase hydration by 20%. And so that's just a basic rule that I have come up with, that I have tested time and time again. So you can convert any recipe on the internet or in recipe books that you use at home into something digestible by increasing the hydration by 20%.
20%. Okay.
So in this like basic recipe that I found off the internet, they were using 500 mils of buttermilk. So instead of 500 mils, we use 600 mils. And that's it. So you're doing the same thing, you're using the same ingredients, you're doing the same process here, you're just increasing hydration by 20%.
And just for folks at home who are I just want to clarify this point, the extra hydration
is needed because you are unlocking the enzymes.
Okay.
And enzymes thrive on hydration.
Okay.
So because the recipe that you will be using isn't cognizant of that, or it's not taking that into the chemistry of the bake, we then need to teach you how to do that. So we're adding that hydration, number one, to create enzyme activity, but number two, we are using a huge amount of fiber, and fiber needs more hydration. And so the fiber is going to soak up all that hydration overnight and really plump out. If you were to bake this straight away, the fiber would have no opportunity to soak up the hydration. It's just getting baked off straight away.
Okay.
So that's perfect, Rupy. That's
this
it.
Is so my hands are clean.
Yeah.
This is awesome. Okay.
And so that's literally it. And now all you do is you leave that at room temperature overnight, covered with a tea towel.
Something like this.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
And room temperature, guys, is really, really important because we're emulating nature. So we're not going to use a fridge. We're just going to let it overnight Obviously, if your kitchen is incredibly warm, or if your kitchen fluctuates in temperatures quite regularly, then you absolutely can use the fridge. In that instance, you would let it out at room temperature for 4 hours and then get it into the fridge, and then the next day get it out of the fridge, and then we're going to add your bicarb. So for those of you who do have a sourdough starter at home and want to elevate this some more, you can add your sourdough starter to that recipe.
Oh, okay. So I can bring this back into play here. So I've got this mixture here.
So you've got this mixture, and now we've got buttermilk here. So buttermilk has a lactic acid ferment, and a sourdough starter has a lactic acid ferment.
Can I go back actually real
100%.
quick to the buttermilk, because I don't think I clarified, because I don't think buttermilk is particularly common in all supermarkets.
Okay.
So maybe we could talk about what buttermilk is, and if you've only got milk, how do you create buttermilk from that?
Yeah, perfect. So basically, buttermilk is like acidifying milk. So you just want to kind of whisk in lemon juice with regular milk, whatever milk you can find, and let that sit kind of overnight, ideally.
Outside?
Yeah, ideally. But again, I guess I don't want to advise too much here, just because I'm conscious that people have a whole range of allergies and stuff like that. So, you know, if you think and you don't trust your room temperatures at home, you, of course, use the fridge.
Yeah.
But I am, you know, like mad into fermentation. Like I want a culture at like temperatures that will really...
You know your room temperatures.
I do.
Yeah, and it's very steady.
Yeah.
So with the lemon juice, how much are we talking? Like one lemon juice per...
Yeah, to a litre a lemon juice.
Okay,
yeah,
fine.
One lemon is fine.
Great.
And so that the acidity in our buttermilk is kind of like, you know, what's happening when spring rainfall falls on soil, you know, and creates that acidic condition that then allows something to germinate. So essentially, the buttermilk is spring soil, and it is germinating the ingredients now. And the lactic acid bacteria is unbinding the enzyme inhibitor phytic acid from the magnesium, calcium, and iron, and then is making the proteins more digestible over time. So the only marked difference between a soak and a ferment is that a soak makes everything digestible, but a ferment transforms and elevates the nutritional content that's inherent in the ingredients by something up to 30%.
That's a really good distinction there. I just want to clarify that. So soaking unlocks everything.
Right.
What does fermenting do?
And then fermenting elevates the nourishment.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, and I suppose that's why it's so important that we teach you guys basic fermentation, because you guys could use water in this recipe, which would make it digestible. But if you use buttermilk, you're making something even more nourishing.
Okay.
And it's just as basic and as easy as that. So the soaking would simply make it digestible. The fermentation through lactic acid bacteria elevates the inherent B vitamins, magnesium, protein, and prebiotic fiber by about 30%.
Brilliant. Okay. And so if, let's say, you're vegan, or you don't want to use the buttermilk, you can use your starter.
Exactly that.
Great.
Exactly that. And like, you know, most bakeries around the world we give people starter for free every day from my bakery. So, you know, go into a bakery, get some starter, and then just start feeding it. You don't need to be a sourdough baker. You don't need to be stretching and folding. You don't need to be making these kind of, you know, big boules of sourdough. You just need this, through which very, very potently digestible, nourishing bread is going to happen.
Fab.
And like Rupy said, you don't get your hands dirty. Like
because I'm really intimidated by I've done sourdough baking myself, and it's great, but it's not something that I feel with my busy lifestyle I have the ability to do every single week, but I still would love to create this. Okay,
absolutely. And also, like, the flavor that you get from lactic acid fermentation is amazing. Whether it be a buttermilk or something like this, or, you know, and the other thing you could do, for those of you who are vegan, you could just use apple cider vinegar. So you don't need to use this. obviously you're not using the buttermilk, you can just use 10 grams of apple cider vinegar in your recipe, and that's going to ferment the ingredients versus just simply soak them.
Could you use a flax egg instead of the egg that we used here?
Absolutely.
Would that work? Okay,
Absolutely.
fine. And
Yeah.
so a flax egg, that would just be like a tablespoon of
So like
flax
1
seeds
part flax to 3 parts water.
Brilliant. Okay, fab. All right, so I can now put
So now you can just let that to the side
mm-hmm.
and cover it with a tea towel. And then tomorrow, guys, we will add 8 grams of bicarb to that. Just simply stir it through, and then we'll get it into our tin to bake. But we can go through that with you guys later again.
Okay,
we
great.
forgot an ingredient, sorry.
Yeah.
We forgot
the treacle. Okay. I'm going to bring this back in. And so the treacle, is that like feeding?
Amazing. So treacle is like this incredibly like potent ingredient. It's high in iron. It's high in B vitamins. It was a big part of Irish bread making back in the day for its nutrient content. And so in general, you want to add like a good tablespoon or 2 tablespoons. And this again, it helps to ferment. It creates beautiful flavour in the bake, really, really exceptional. And again, there's a wide variety of treacle out there. We use apple cider vinegar treacle that we get from a place in Kilkenny called Highbank Orchard in Ireland. But you know, like this molasses is pretty much accessible in all corner stores now.
Beautiful.
And it's just, it brings so much wild flavour and some beautiful wild yeasts as well, Rupy.
And some colour as well.
Yes,
like
stunning
it's completely
colour.
transformed.
Yeah,
Gosh.
stunning.
Oh, that's amazing.
And I mean, you can guys, you can use a sourdough starter and buttermilk. And what you're going to do there is you're just going to bring more diversity to your gut because you're going to have loads of strains of bacteria. So the more strains of bacteria, the more fertilization of good bacteria is going to happen in your gut. So go wild, mix all the cultures you have.
Beautiful. Okay, so this goes to one side. This is overnight.
Yes.
And then what's the next step? You just pop it into this lined tray?
So tomorrow, at any point in the day, you're just going to take 8 grams or 2 teaspoons of bicarb, stir it through. Then you're going to get it into your tin, and then you're going to bake this bread at 190 for 1 hour. At the 1 hour mark, you're going to take it out of its tin and then bake it off again for about 10 minutes, just to give the crust some nice texture and kind of flavour on the outside. And then a bread like this will stay fresh at room temperature for 7 days, wrapped in a tea towel.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So the benefit, guys, of using a lactic acid fermentation is that you extend the shelf life of the foods that you eat. And so especially for someone who's like living on their own, this recipe is really conducive to sustainable living.
Okay, great. So once I've whacked it in there and I've added the bicarb, how long am I putting it into the oven for?
Yes, so you're going to bake it for 60 minutes at 190 in its tin, and then at the 60-minute mark, you're going to take it out of its tin and bake it for another 10 minutes.
Okay.
So it's a 70 minutes. That's it, Rupy. Yeah, and in the middle of the oven. And you can bake a bunch of these at any one time. You know, you can fill the oven with 6 of them. You know, they freeze incredibly well.
That was my next question.
Yeah, they freeze so well. And then when you defrost them, you increase the prebiotic fibre content again. Yeah. So we have loads of customers baking our recipes and freezing and feeling better.
Honestly, I love freezing bread because through that process of retrogradation, you increase that prebiotic fibre, but it just makes it so convenient in the morning when like I come to the studio, I just take out a couple of slices that I've already pre-sliced and put like some baking paper between, so it's easy to separate them. And then like, you know, some eggs or some greens, some leeks or whatever, just piled on top, bit of sauerkraut. It's like the perfect breakfast for me. And this is going to have a lot of protein in per slice as well,
yes,
right?
Yes, it is. Absolutely. And it is funny, like we do that with our teff scones. We freeze them and the texture out of the freezer, just much more fluffy or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, it couldn't be easier to make your own bread at home.
Fab.
So digestible. So it's the next day and we're adding 8 grams of bicarb, which is pretty much 2 teaspoons.
Oh yeah, nice.
So if you go a gram up, don't worry about it. And then all we're doing, Rupy, is stirring this together.
Okay.
So where's our wooden spoon again? Or we'll go in here.
I've got this silicone spoon if you want, or do you want the
wooden? Whichever one you think you've got more control with. Maybe the wooden spoon.
Okay, go for that.
So you're just going to stir the bicarb in, guys. And you do want to make sure that the bicarb is blended through the whole mixture. Otherwise, the rise won't be as even. And also, there's nothing worse than biting into like a piece of white powder.
Yeah. And the bicarb, what's the purpose of?
So the bicarb is your raising agent.
Okay.
So when you're not using a sourdough starter, which is fed from flour and water, you're just not going to get a rise. So this is our rising agent. And you know, agents like this in these small quantities are not going to have any type of adverse effect on your digestive health. And this really, guys, this is a super basic recipe to introduce your body to the benefits of preparing food overnight. So that's ready to go into our tin now. And we can use the silicone spoon to wipe off anything else. And so, guys, if your loaf tin isn't very grease-proof, it is a good idea to brush the tin with a little bit of olive oil or butter before putting the paper on. But the paper should be enough. And it just keeps things nice and tidy as well.
Yeah. I've seen you've just done one lengthways and then a couple across.
That's it, exactly, yeah. And you want to make sure that the paper is corner to corner.
Okay.
Otherwise, it will get stuck.
Okay.
So do spend time lining your tins properly. Otherwise, you're going to be very upset when your bread doesn't have crust on all sides. And then because this mixture is so wet, guys, you don't need to put a cross on it or anything like that. Or, you know, sometimes when people make brown soda bread, you see crosses and...
Yeah, what's the whole cross?
It's just to allow the bread to spring. Because in that instance, the bread isn't very hydrated. You know, it's much drier.
Okay.
And so when a bread is dry, it's not going to spring.
Right.
It can't stretch. So you can only stretch when you're hydrated.
Okay.
So this is super hydrated. This recipe is pretty much 120% hydration. So again, if you're a bit of a sourdough geek, you'll know what that means. So the more hydrated a bread, the more digestible. And so often if you go to a sourdough bakery, they'll be like, oh, this sourdough is 100% hydration or 86% hydration. And in the same way that extraction tells you a story about the bread, so does its hydration percentage.
Okay. And can I tap this down to get into the crevices? Or
You can, absolutely. Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Fine. All right, do that little tap. Okay, and so into preheated oven.
Yeah, your oven's at 190 degrees now.
190 degrees.
Yeah, and you're going to bake this for 1 hour at 190 degrees.
1 hour, 190 degrees.
190 degrees, sorry,
and then we're going
Rupy.
to take it out, and then we are going to bake it for another 10 minutes.
That's it.
Great. And we have one that we've already got, which is over here. So we've got 2 loaves.
Right.
Using 2 slightly different methods that you described already.
Yeah, exactly. So if you were to use your sourdough starter in making this bread, you're going to have a bread that looks a little bit like this one that has the oat flakes on top. And then if you've made a bread with bicarb, you're going to have something that looks like this. So the bicarb is actually going to give you more spring than the sourdough starter is. And their texture is going to be wildly different because of the different strains of lactic acid bacteria in here.
Wow, these
so
look
we can just
beautiful.
cut into the middle of both.
Do you want to do the honours?
Sure, yeah. I'd actually love to.
So the first one we're doing
is the one with
the
bicarb.
bicarb. So this is, oh wow, look at that.
So that's nice and
beautiful.
Nice and wet, nice amount of treacle going through there as well.
Gosh, isn't that amazing? It smells wonderful.
The smell is incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, and that looks like, you know, a brown loaf that you could find in the supermarket, but this is infinitely more digestible. You've got higher protein content. This is amazing. And
look how wildly different they look. I mean, it's
so
the exact
different.
same ingredients. The only difference being that in this one here, on your left, this has a sourdough starter in it, and this one doesn't.
Wow.
Yeah, and flavour-wise, they will be completely different.
Gosh, this is like acidic.
Yes, very acidic.
Yeah. And this has got a nuttier, sort of more rounded flavour.
Yeah, so and more the molasses come through there.
Yes, this is like slightly sweet. So the one I'm smelling that's sweet, that's the one with bicarb.
Right.
And then the sort of fermented lactic acid, that's the sourdough. And like, I mean, just look at the difference there. That's so stark with the exact
Isn't
same
it?
ingredients. Wonderful.
It's such a
wonderful.
great showcase of what grain can be.
Yeah.
Like the exact same flours, the exact same level of hydration as well, Rupy, and wildly different.
Yeah.
So when I test these recipes on people back home in Ireland, everyone prefers the bicarb one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, everyone. Yeah,
Because if I had to choose, I'd go for that one.
yeah.
I don't know why. There's something appealing about that. Maybe it's that gorgeous crack in the top and like the fact that it's got this lovely dark crust on the, that for me like screams wholesome. And yeah, I can't wait to toast that.
Yeah. Amazing. You're just gonna have to take some starter home.
Yeah, I know, I will.
This.
I will. Gosh, thank you so much. That is wonderful.
smells great.
Got to make sure you try this recipe and start soaking your ingredients.
It smells so good. I just love. It's just I think some things like just smell of home, don't they?
Yeah. Amazing.
Beautiful.
Amazing.
Stunning.
Bread is the most common food that we consume every single day. And I've done a video on how you can recognize good quality bread from bad quality bread. Check it out right there.